Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for a poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one, obviously, being the poetry discussion playlist, but number two, being the Emily Dickinson poetry discussion playlist, a playlist of all the videos I've made over Emily Dickinson through nearly 10 years of running this channel. Now, this discussion will be over something that is quite possibly going to be considered a darker subject. But I disagree. Something that is okay, nihilism. I consider myself a nihilist, and we will get to why at the end of the poem and why I think that this poem is a beautiful depiction of nihilism itself. The poem in question is I'm Ceded, I've Stopped Being Theirs by Emily Dickinson, and it reads as such. I'm ceded, I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. And they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools I've finished threading too. Baptized before without the choice, but this time consciously, of grace, unto supremest name. Called to my full, the crescent dropped, existence's whole arc, filled up with one small diadem. My second rank, too small the first, crowning on my father's breast, half unconscious, queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown. So nihilism is, in my opinion, often misconstrued. There was, especially in Russian nihilism, the phrase radical autonomy was one of the sort of principles of what had become Russian nihilism. Russian nihilism largely was birthed through literature, at least to my knowledge. I may be completely wrong. Through literature and literary criticism, as opposed to, for example, German nihilism, which was birthed largely through philosophical movements. That is, movements which were seminally life practices versus with literature what I would deign to characterize as life observations. I think that literature, good literature, the best literature, almost always starts almost like science, almost starts always with observation and goes from there. Philosophy, I think, sometimes skews further from practice. Not that that makes it wrong. I think that it's very necessary. I think that it's one of my favorite things to talk about, but not as favorite as literature. So this idea of radical autonomy was manifest early through a Russian writer known as Dmitry Pisarev. Pisarev, I believe, writing in the 1850s, 1860s, has a quote. Oh no. In short, he's talking about nihilism. He's talking about sort of a founding principle of nihilism. In short, here is the ultimatum of our camp. What can be smashed must be smashed. Whatever will withstand the blow will do. What flies into smithereens is rubbish. In any case, strike out right and left. No harm will or can come of it. This is basically a scientific principle, right? You have some fancy fangled idea on how life came into existence by spawning from water. That's one of the ways that they used to think. Then they developed a Swede, I think, developed the microscope and said, oh no, there's just stuff living in that pond water. The flies don't just come out of it. There's little bugs and stuff in there. So that feeling of, oh, well, I think stuff just comes out of water. That's how life spontaneously spawns. Science said, well, we looked into it and it's a little bit different. That is what is at the heart of this quote. There are all of these assumptions in life. There are all of these assumptions in culture. There are all of these assumptions in art. There are all of these assumptions in every day that you get out of bed. What the nihilists sought to do was say, we're going to start from zero here. First principles. Why do you like this stilted language in your writing? Why do you believe in God? Why do you like or do this thing and that? What we're going to do is we're just going to get rid of it. And we're going to see what happens, right? So maybe it's not exactly a conservative approach to things. But here's the thing. Nowhere in this ultimatum put out there by Dmitry Pisarev does it say, if it did work, we're going to smash it anyway. He said, we'll try to smash it. If we can't figure out why it's necessary, well, maybe it's just as good gone. That is nihilism. What happened was, culturally, World War I and World War II, it started with World War I, though. People looked around and said, oh, nothing withstands the blow. Nothing does. It's all garbage. And nihilism became nothingnessism, right? So it's one of the things that people sort of try to relegate nihilism to meaning is nothingism, but it's not nothingism at the end of the day. It's nothingism as far as presumptions are concerned. But in light of 2 world wars, in light of the atrocities, it would be easy to look around and say, oh, well, nothing withstood the blow. Nothing is worth it. Nothing is good. Everything is smithereens. Everything is rubbish. But we have no reason to stop there. Because a Jew didn't brush his teeth, and a Jew did brush his teeth. They both went to the concentration camp. Brushing your teeth has no regard, has no bearing on the outcome. That's the wrong approach, because the question of concentration camps, much bigger than the idea of brushing your teeth. Brushing your teeth keeps your teeth in your face. Brushing your teeth is good for that. What happened was the atrocity of those world wars was so great, was so large, and by the way, was so immediate in the aftermath of the sort of growth of nihilism, the birth of nihilism, that now people had this new tool, this new philosophical tool, these new philosophical lenses to just put in place and say, oh, it's all garbage. But that is the wrong idea. We did not have, perhaps, the cultural tools in place to stop something like the fascists in World War II, something like the communists that came after. Well, something like the communists that came after around World War I, really. But the rise of demagoguery in communism. But it's the wrong scale to say that nothing withstood the blow. It was the wrong scale to say that because these things, these atrocities, these monstrosities popped up in human history, that nothing mattered. At the end of the day, it's easy to come to that conclusion, right? It's hard to blame anyone for getting there with this new lens that people could put on their faces. I mean, by the way, probably not a lot of difference between the stuff that went on in World War I and World War II versus, for example, Genghis Khan, right? That was horrific on a massive scale. Not all at once, not all in the same place, but over time, right? You knew if Genghis Khan was coming to town, you weren't going to have a good day. But it wasn't even just... So one of the things that I think ultimate, and I will get back to the poem, I promise, but this is why I'm using this poem to speak about these things. One of the things that I think was ultimately demoralizing about World War I, that was right around the time where suddenly it did not matter how good a warrior you were. It didn't matter. You could have done all of the jumping jacks. You could have done all of the push-ups. You could have been 6'7". You could have been burly and blood hungry. It wouldn't matter. A little bit of mustard gas gets in your lungs. All of your training was for naught. It was nothingism. You run up against one of those Gatling guns, it is all for naught. Maybe you were 6'8". That just meant you were a bigger target. And that was new, right? That was new in warfare. On the mass scale, right? Always there had been equalizers, but not like that. So the entire mindset of something so primal as war was underrooted. So why do I talk about this poem here? That term, radical autonomy, radical individualism. What a phrase. In nihilistic terms, what we're saying is, look, I know my mother and father's opinion should matter to me, but at the end of the day, it does not stop me from eating. I still have to go to work. So, maybe I can care about my mother and father and just not care what they think about me. This becomes a real thing. Now, is this a breakdown of the family structure? I guess you could say maybe. But what it does is it seeds the individual. I'm ceded. I've stopped being theirs. Who is they? The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. The they in question becomes a little bit clearer. Now, and they can put it with my dolls. My childhood, and the string of spools I've finished threading too. Now, there is one little phrase there that kind of seems strange. My childhood? Now, you think I'm done with my name. Your name is something you use. You can put it with the string of spools I'm finished threading too. Your string of spools is something you do. Your childhood is something that was. It is the past. But practically, is it? Should be. How many things from your childhood do you carry with you in negative fashion that weigh down upon you every day, but they're no longer there? Did you have a bully in grade school whose face you can still see? Did you come from a rough home environment that still makes you crouch when there's a loud noise? When you see an angry scowl on someone's face, regardless of whether you know them, is there still this wriggling, writhing feeling of guilt inside you that surely it must be you who's done something? Nihilism says, doesn't matter. Smithereens, baby, yeah. Baptized before without the choice. Radical autonomy suggests the choice should be yours. Do you want this baptism? But this time consciously of grace unto supremest name, called to my full, the crescent dropped, existence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem, my second rank, too small the first, crowning on my father's breast, a half-conscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown. You know, it's one of the things that is, and this might be me misinterpreting philosophy. Nietzsche is very difficult for me. Nietzsche was making, ultimately, early in his career, arguments against nihilism, arguments against the stripping of human nature. Nietzsche wanted restoration of a vivacious individual. He saw this ascetic ideal that he associated with nihilism. He associated it with nihilism, I think, wrongly. And he was early in his career, therefore, very much against nihilism. A lot of his arguments were against nihilism. But, and again, I could be wrong in my interpretations, he ended up setting up a stronger nihilism. One of the phrases that we get from Nietzsche is the will to power. Is there truth but power? With the power, any truth you deem could be so, but it can't, because it will not withstand the blow of reality. But this idea at the end, with the will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown. I choose just the power. The power, the autonomy here. This is a very nihilistic poem from Emily Dickinson, at least in my opinion. So that's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more literature in the future.